All right, well, I'm the Director of Habitat Restoration. I work with the Skagit River System Cooperative. It's a tribal consortium of the Sox Waddell and the Swinomish tribes. Back in the day, when it was first formed, it was a three-tribe consortium. It had Upper Skagit included, but in 2004, the Upper Skagits decided to pull out of the consortium and form their own natural resource department. SRSC is where we're otherwise known, assists the member tribes with their management obligations in the Skagit River and primarily in the ceded lands. We have 5 different programs associated with the co-op. There's 2 general theme areas, the population programs and the habitat programs. So harvest management is Casey Ruff, who directs that. Research, Eric Beamer, directs that. Timber Fish and Wildlife, headed by Kurt Veldhusen, primarily responsible for tracking the Forest Fish Agreement. Environmental Services is Stan Walsh and Larry Wasserman. They're primarily charged with permit reviews and protecting habitat. And then this is my bin, Habitat Restoration. So I want to be really clear, I'm a habitat guy. You've been hearing a lot from the fish guys today, so we're going to take a little bit of a detour here. We're going to just talk about habitat. I've been doing this for a while. I did it, I'm from the area, grew up in Snohomish, been from Washington, worked in Oregon for Oregon trout for 5 years. We came up here, short hiatus with Snohomish County, and then the last 15 years I've been with the Cooperative. So in the 15 years that I've been working on the Skagit, I've managed to, I have a great team of people that I work with. We've got 5 professional staff members. We've got 5 technicians that do a lot of work in the field for us. So total of 10 people working together. We've had a solid group for a long time. And over the last 15 years, we've amassed a portfolio of around 50 projects that we've worked on and still are working on. I like to say that whenever we take on a project, our mantra is that we stick with it. We make sure that we steward that project into the future. We don't just build it and walk away. And as Kurt mentioned earlier, a lot of the emphasis over the last 15 years has really been built around Chinook. But today I'm going to talk, I've kind of high-graded a few of the projects that we're doing that will help Steelhead. And one thing that I would really like to emphasize here, there's a couple take-homes I hope you get from my talk. One is that our approach to restoration is that of it's an ecological approach. We see ourselves as ecologists. So we're not interested necessarily in helping just Chinook or just Steelhead. What we try to do is work on projects that restores the ecological processes that form the habitat that these species use. And in doing so, we're helping the species, the target species, but we're helping a whole range of other animals, aquatic dependent species that rely on those habitats. And it's a really simple formula. Largely what we're doing is removing the things that man has done. You know, the changes that we're invoking on the landscape largely remove the impediments to Mother Nature really doing her thing. The stewardship part comes in just making sure that those processes still have room to work and move. So this map shows a range of the projects in the Delta. This map shows the range of projects that we have in the Upper River. Again, these are older maps actually, so there's quite a few more dots on the map. But this gives you an impression we're working in a big basin, we're working all over the place and throughout that basin. So I'm going to start with one of the projects we just completed last year. The other reoccurring theme that you're going to hear in this talk is that none of these projects happens without collaboration. There's a ton of work that goes into making a project come off and actually get built on the ground. In fact, 9% or 90% of my job is really just getting permission. Really just getting permission to do the right thing. Invoking change in the landscape is not easy because it means that one land use has to go away for the benefit of fish and wildlife, and it takes a lot of lifting to get there. So Cumberland Creek is an example of maybe less about impediments on the landscape, but about a unique collaboration. And I'll also say that these collaborations, the more unique they are and unexpected, the better it is. You can't have just a narrow bandwidth of partners. It takes everybody pulling together. So in this one, we had Skagit County, the Army Corps of Engineers involved, Seattle City Light, the Land Trust, and some of it, we don't necessarily all get along all the time. But in this case, we got along and we were able to put a project on the ground. In part, this project was because of something the Corps did for the county. They dumped a bunch of riprap in the river. We beat them up all over it, and they had to mitigate for that. And after years and years of beating them up, they finally stepped up to it, and we picked a project together. And essentially, Cumberland Creek is this, here's South Skagit Highway in this band right here. It comes down, and the highway interrupts a fan, an alluvial fan, which is this portion here. This is a common reoccurrence. Roadways usually cut fans off, and we're always looking for ways in which we can restore process on that fan. Normally, we would be looking at different distributary routes for that fan to operate up above here, but in this case, this is a pretty hard restriction and not a huge amount of habitat up here. So in its current form, it was breaking off because of some riprap along here, breaking off to the side in a shorter channel route to the main stem river, which is out here. An old historic channel was off to the side out this way that was cut off by that riprap. And this is where some more of that collaboration came in. Seattle City Light, Skagit Land Trust, essentially bought up all of this ground out here for conservation purposes. And we were able to remove a couple houses in here as a part of those conservation properties going online, and we had the opportunity to bend this Cumberland Creek back around the corner and down through this habitat, opening up about a mile of extra habitat, spawnable habitat for a variety of different species. Steelhead do like to use this stream extensively. So this is what it looks like afterwards. So here's essentially what is in effect another revetment, but it's all root wads, log jam, earth, that sort of thing, all blended together. And we bent it around the corner. We had a lot of high flows this year. It worked great. So I'm going to blow through a bunch of these types of projects. There's a couple that I'm really going to highlight towards the end of my talk. But if you have questions, I'd go ahead and ask them along the way. If you really have any burning questions, feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind. So another one that we've been working at in the middle Skagit area, this one has been evolving over time. Another common theme, these things take a long time to happen. This puppy really started with Northern State Recreation Area. This is 2001. I and a couple of my colleagues were directly involved in devising this plan. This cartoon that you see over here was the plan in a nutshell. Reestablish the alluvial fan in this reach, reestablish wetlands in this reach. Here's Highway 20 coming through here. Below here, put the stream back into a more natural course over on this side. So over the years, we've been, all the partners have been doing various elements of this. This fan went in some years ago. It's doing what it intended. The wetlands have been reestablished. And we've slowly picked up a bunch of parcels down here that were all under private ownership that are now in conservation status. So that Northern State property, which is up here and owned by the county, now has a bunch of ground that's this is held by the Swinomish Indian tribe. This is held by PSE. These blue parcels that we're currently pursuing, and these additional parcels are actually for sale as well. We're working to secure some more money to get those. So we've got a large conservation area that's really starting to stack up The nice thing about this is that Highway 20, once again, ends up being a problem. It's cutting off, everything has to get funneled through one bridge here. So there's a possibility we might be able to punch a bridge in a couple different locations on Highway 20 if we get enough land blocked up. This historically was a gigantic wetland, just a regular coho factory. This whole Hansen Creek in this location has a lot of Chinook spawning, but it also has quite a bit of steelhead rearing going on. Very, very good steelhead stream. And the screw trap for the Upper Skagit tribe is actually, for the studies that Ed was talking about, is kind of located right in here. That's where they're doing their actual work. So it's an interesting place. It's an intersection on the landscape where a lot's going on. And because of the efforts of a lot of different people, we've cobbled together something that actually gives us the opportunity now to talk about that last piece of the plan that I mentioned earlier. This is Highway 20 up here, so it's a different view. But currently, Hansen Creek comes down through here and just takes these hard bends. And that's all, it's just, the pioneers dredged it. They just constantly dredged it. And so after decades of doing that, Hansen Creek continued to get perched. All the sediment load was coming down and just falling out in this low stretch. Well, everything's fine in their minds as long as you keep dredging it. Interesting story there. They'd fight over who got the dredge spoils. In fact, there were gun battles over who got the dredge spoils from the dredging operations. We in the state finally said, no more dredging. You got to do it right. You got to stop harming the fish. So that ended, and this plan started going into effect. So we hope to build this particular channel somewhere in 2017. So that one's coming up pretty quick. Wiseman Creek. So Wiseman Creek's its own problem. I'll come back to the drone. But Wiseman Creek, by all accounts, was a great little steelhead stream. Great little steelhead stream, very productive in its day. Well, Wiseman Creek's not very happy. Same kind of thing. Fan's been interrupted. Here we go, State Route 20 again. Here's the fan right up in this whole area. Well, that's Minkler, here's 20. So the fan's right here. It's all dredged out, diked up, and we're trying to force all the sediment load down into this flatter zone, and it dumps all out and then wants to steer the stream every which direction. So it has no defined channel at this point, and it's just diffuse flow, kind of tracking over to Minkler Lake a bit, kind of piling out along here. This is the old Centennial, well, it's the old railroad. It's the Centennial Trail now. But that acts like a dam across the entire system. So this ends up just being a big cork of sediment here. The channel's kind of lost. It used to go down this way. It's now kind of filtering through these fields that are in kind of a wetland reserve status and out through a flap gate here. So there's Wiseman Creek.
Can you go back? You showed it connected to Black Slough, directly connected to Black Slough.
Yeah, that's correct. There is some flow. I'll show you a picture of that here in a minute. This is where it was last, say in the 90s. And now the bigger part of it is coming down through here and down this direction. Some of it's going to Minkler Lake and out through Childs. So it's all over the place. And so this is the main flow of it during the winter time, and that, of course, is not good for fish. So we're really trying to figure this one out in short order. There's Wiseman Creek flowing down the Centennial Trail. This is 2015. That's the way it is right now. It's been high-centered in this condition for almost the better part of 8 years. So this one's a tough one. Here's Utopia Road, Black Slough. This is where the main flow used to be, and it's just choked all off. You got a little bit of flow under here, but it's atrophied to the point that it's hardly recognizable. So again, partnerships, collaboration. Good news is we got a lot of land to work with now. The acquisition effort has been substantial. Land Trust has picked up quite a few pieces of ground. Skagit County's got a little bit over here. NRCS has some locked up here, and we've got willing landowners that are all starting to line up. What used to be a really difficult neighborhood to work in, we're finding a toehold to work with those folks because they're just equally as frustrated as we are with the existing condition. People want to start seeing it get off high center, you know, and they're starting to kind of think about it differently. And thinking a little bit more creatively. So we're hopeful that we're going to get something off the dime here and get going. So we're going to be doing a lot of survey, and part of the problem is how do you survey such a large area? I'm showing you, that's a ton of landscape to go after. It's very difficult going. You need to try to figure out the topography before you get much further with it. So we're going to start around the trail, kind of where it's flowing over. We know a bit of what's going on around the fan and around that area, and the local landowners and those adjacent farms. What's happening just on the other side of the trail. We've got some connections that we know about at the base of the trail over at Child's Creek. We've got some, and then you've got all this agricultural drainage ditch and then Black Slough. So we got some focal areas, and we're just trying to pull it all together. And the tool that I opened this project up with, the drone, we're actually trying out flying survey, LiDAR topography with the drone, which is, it's kind of unique. Most LiDAR is flown very high, very slow, one pass. The drone gives you low and slow, and multiple passes and multiple hits. So we're playing around with some different tools that hopefully give it some advantage out there. There may be some different pathways we want to go to include Child's Creek with this project. All right, and here is a doozy of a project. It's the Barnaby Slough project, and we are really happy to be working on this one. This one has been the holy grail of the upriver restoration world for better part of a decade. And thanks to partnerships, we're getting this one off the ground. A bunch of you might be familiar with this location. This doesn't show Highway 20 real well, but that's where it is, just above Rockport. And again, a lot of conservation land out there in the landscape. DFW's old Barnaby Slough hatchery facility is right here. This is where a lot of steelhead rearing was going on and outplanting into the Skagit. That program stopped. Dave, what was the year that it stopped? 1990?
207.
Was it 207? Was that late? Okay. But anyway, Nature Conservancy has picked up quite a bit of ground, and Seattle City Light has contributed to picking up some more ground in the process of trying to get some more as well. And we've got an opportunity to look at a large-scale project across this landscape. We've just completed the feasibility work to kind of lay out a game plan. And we've looked at several different alternatives here, starting with alternative one that just looks at the blocking culverts. These are blocking culverts and pieces of infrastructure out on that landscape. So by law, all of these really need to be fixed. So if nothing else happens, these get fixed. Okay, that's alternative one. There's no action alternative in our study. The second alternative we looked at was remove all the infrastructure around Barnaby Slough alone. So that's just these dikes that were built, rearing ponds in this area. There's a lower dike here, an upper dike here, and we'd still fix all the other passage barriers, but we'd leave Harrison alone. This is called Harrison Pond. This is a very large concrete dam on the front end of it with a fish ladder associated with it. Alternative three, well, it went after Harrison Pond, essentially. And so we included that in our analysis. And then alternative four takes an active effort to push some portion of the main stem Skagit into the restored site so that we would pick additional flow up after removing all the infrastructure. So we modeled it with several log jams put in up here and approximated a 30% flow being moved into the Barnaby Reach area. And I'm going to I'll cut to the chase for the sake of just staying on schedule here. But the results we were really happy with. We were pretty excited, you know, from our standpoint. We're all worried, like, oh my goodness, you know, this is pretty dramatic. We can be pushing a lot of it, you know, playing around with the main stem river. There's a lot of effects that could happen. We could mess with Highway 530. We could harm downstream landowners. There's real risk involved with this. So we're pretty happy with the results. These results show, it's a little bit hard to interpret all at once without a lot of the background, but this is the maximum depth in a 2-year flow under Alt 4. And this is in that same max depth in a 2-year flow under existing conditions. So this shows differences. So this is good. Now everything's kind of activated. We're seeing a lot of additional flooding there. We're not seeing a lot of flooding out here. That's great news as far as we're concerned. There's homes over here. And this is the lower panels are all the downstream end of it, of the complex. Existing condition, new condition, with just Alt 4, the most aggressive option. And here's the differences. So we didn't flood these people out. We didn't change their flooding condition. So we're stoked about this. We're just like, yeah, all right, you know, we're just like fish biologists get. And then we just say, well, let's go tell the public the good news. So anyway, we took this up to a landowners meeting of these people in particular. Well, they weren't too happy. They feel like, well, there's a couple things at play, quite a few things. And this is just a good example of what goes on in the restoration world. Getting permission is always very difficult. And it starts with a process in some ways of educating people what really is going on, even in their existing condition. There's a subset of folks that looked at these panels and went, oh my God, you're going to flood us. No, you're already in the floodplain. This is the way it would look.
How far down is that?
This is right at Rockport, basically. 530 is right here, and Rockport's right in there. So it's a bit of, and then we come to find that this subset of folks all just moved in since 2007, and we haven't seen a substantial flood since 2007. So, all right, we got these folks. And then you got a bunch of folks that have been around for a long time that are really still pretty chapped about Barnaby being closed down in the first place. And they really hate the fact that we contributed to the fact that the facility got closed down, and now we're going to go ahead and pump the river into it. They think it ought to be reopened and run again as a hatchery facility. So that's two ends of the spectrum, and in between there's all kinds of different views. And this is really truly the nature of our work, is that when we do a big landscape scale project like this, which is exactly what we like to do, when you're restoring ecological processes, it's not something you can do measured on a metric of 5 log structures or 200 feet of spawning gravel. It's measured in acres and miles. We like to take on projects that change the landscape. So it takes a long time to get everybody on board with the picture and the story, and that's where we're at with this project. We're moving into the design phase. We're keeping Alternative 4 on the table, thanks to Seattle City Light and to the Nature Conservancy and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, believe it or not, are all on board with moving ahead with Alternative 4 as the preferred alternative at this time, just based off the evidence that we're seeing here. The risk isn't evident to us to take it off the table. As much as local landowners down here are like, why are you doing this? Why would you even think about advancing that? It's like, well, until we can see some line of evidence that we should remove it because of risk and liability, we're not going to remove it. Because when it comes down to it, there's a big bump. If you do alternative 2 and you just open up Barnaby alone, really doesn't do much for fish. It's the flood flows really don't go in there and activate that site as much as you'd expect. Same with alternative 3. It's kind of getting wet, doesn't really provide a lot of habitat, new habitat. Still would be habitat, but not as much as you'd think. But as soon as you build alternative 4 and then alternative 4 in a future condition, it's huge for fish. Those are big numbers in our world. Granted, it's not huge for steelhead, it's down there, but it's positive, right? This is rearing habitat. This is actually looking at adults, so we have a couple different levels of analyses with that, but those production numbers are compelling. It's exactly why we want to continue to be aggressive about trying to move ahead with an active hand in restoring those floodplain processes. If I'm going to go back, I'll just go back for a second. And there is evidence that this reach of the river did have some straightening by whatever hand. You know, it could be the Army Corps. We don't have a smoking gun that it was done, but there's some evidence that this was straightened a bit at a time. And one thing we do know is that the cross dike in this area and the cross dike down in this area are already preventing this river from activating. There is an active channel that wants to try to break in through here, but every time it overflows, it's hitting that dike and backwatering, so it's not getting a lot of head of steam. So we think we move those impediments, we're actually going to start seeing some of the river doing its own work in that area. So we're excited about that project. We're also excited about this project. This happens to be in the backyard of Mr. McMillan. He's been getting to watch our activities there for some time, and hopefully he approves. But anyway, we've been busy working in the Savage Slough area. Again, massive land purchase by Seattle City Light allowed this project to move ahead, and we were able to take a fresh view of this landscape and what's going on with it. In a nutshell, again, for the sake of brevity, what we're looking at is trying to move the South Skagit Highway, which is here, which actively cuts across the channels and fans and a variety of habitat features in these lowland areas here of Mill Creek and Savage Creek. Bill talked about them in his presentation. So we're looking at trying to reconnect some isolated habitats here, improve the fan functions along Mill Creek and connectivity of Savage through all of this. One option is to leave South Skagit where it's at and do better bridging, trestling, those sort of things in these areas, upgrade culverts. And another is to actively move the highway up onto a hill slope. So we're just completing the feasibility work on that. We haven't selected a preferred alternative, but we're in the process of going through that with the county, and we'll be presenting at the Watershed Council in a couple weeks to talk about which alternative we pursue next. So another one we're excited about. It's got this shows some of the habitats and at what frequencies we might expect them to be connected if we can re-engage some of the riverine processes coming from the bottom end during flood flows. So these would be 2-year flows, 2.3 year, 1.6 year, 2 year. Those reoccurrence intervals would be where we'd start seeing some habitats re-engage and available as refugia for fish. All of that spells good things for steelhead that are coming out of Mill Creek, Savage. These are places they can hold up during those flood flows, reside, rear, allow the waters to come down. So it's a big project. That one's going to be an expensive one. It's going to take several more years for it to move ahead. And then again, the same theme keeps reoccurring here. Acquisitions open the doors. In a lot of ways, we do work with willing landowners here and there, but it's difficult to work on an ecological basis unless you block up large chunks of ground. And so around the Sauk, around the Sox Waddell Reservation right here, these are acquisitions that went ahead in the last few years, probably the last 7 years. We've managed to pick up these big pieces of ground, this one big farm here, and really kind of create a conservation area that's not, it's no longer farmed. And we removed 5 different houses across the landscape, had to demolish them. But it allowed us to pull riprap along the Bryson Road edge. All of this was able to come out. Those houses were actively being protected from erosion and from the Sauk River doing its thing, migrating, and activating old side channels, relic sloughs, charging them, being able to allow fish to rear in those habitats. So we're happy that we were able to open this up and create some more opportunity for the river to do its thing. And kudos to the Sox Waddell Tribe, who, even unlike, well, unfortunately they're out in the floodplain here. And believe me, they don't want to be out on the floodplain. That's where they were put. They don't necessarily like where they were put. They'd like to be back over in their homelands, but they're dealing with it. That's where their village is. And the riprap was over in this area here. And instead of being letting fear drive their decisions, we did a couple reports, some analysis, and the tribe elected to go ahead and allow all of this to happen, surround themselves with a nice conservation area, even though, and the report says there really is no increased risk. There's already existing risk, but no increased risk because of these actions. It's just a wild river, and it's going to do some things. So there's a big oxbow that comes right in the back here behind the reservation. So again, I'm really proud of my constituency in stepping up and saying, we want the river to be able to do what it wants to do, rather than live in fear and try to throw rock at the river. It's not our way. So really proud that they took that route. And so that leads me to, again, we're blocking up the landscape. So here's another little trib, another little story that we're working on here. This is that upper area I just showed you. This is Lyle Creek. It's an intermittent creek that Bill's talked about. It goes dry. Lots of steelhead spawning in this. But the way it's been managed, its fan's cut off by Highway 530 over in here. This we're not dealing with right now. This is not the preferred alternative, but where its current alignment is, this used to be dredged all the time. All the sediments want to kind of pile out into this low, flat area. And there's a low area that it wants to jump. This is why this landowner actually decided to move. He was like, okay, I'm done fighting this. You guys aren't going to let me dredge it. Then you take it off my hands. I'll sell. We're moving to California. So, great people. They were really nice to get to know. Once you got to know them, they were fantastic people. But they were like, they kept trying to fight it right here and trying to keep that stream from bumping out into the lower area. So it's a simple little project. It's no big. It's not a biggie. It's not rocket science. But it's a nice little steelhead project. And so we've been talking with the Wild Steelhead Coalition about Patagonia support for that particular project. And so really happy to see if that can move ahead. Gives us a nice little bump in an area that we don't know behaves much like a lot of those lower valley streams that Bill was talking about, though. Intermittent, used heavily by steelhead. We'd love to give it another nice homework and kind of bounce around between those two channels. It just doubles the habitat area that they can use. So that is my short presentation of what we've got going on in the Skagit right now. Appreciate your time, and if you got any other questions or you want to look at what we got going on, Barnaby's study is on the web, and our website has a bunch of our reports and some